welcome back to the Late Late Podcast. I'm your host, Mase in real life. I'm here with Logan. I'm gonna butcher it again. I know you just told me. It's super raw, this podcast, so like this all stays in. I like this. Logan Staats. Okay,
Yeah.
okay. The A's more like okay.
Yeah.
Logan Staats. All right. No. First off, I just want to say thank you for hopping on.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much for having me here, man. It's my first time in Fredericton, and I'm excited to be on the podcast and be in your community and have my boots on the ground here.
Yeah, no, and I think your show is gonna be crazy. Like, I know you mentioned earlier that you don't really have a big following here, but like most of the people I talk to know who you are, and they saw you on the launch like back in 2016, 17.
Yeah.
And no, I'm super happy to have you in our territory too, right? And
yeah, man. We'll go. I've just spent so much of my career, touring the West Coast in Canada, and Central Canada, and now I'm just kind of starting to dip my foot here on the East Coast, so it's exciting for me. I'm excited to play tonight. I'm excited to, share my gift from Creator with everybody down here, and see how I'm receptive.
That's crazy. So first off, you just want to like tell the viewers and the listeners, like, who you are, like exactly who you are,
Well, så jeg går, skal jeg gå og Logan Staats young yuts. Og now I want to get to Dorden, get yak kahaga, ni will go and joda, the Swede, Nita and Guido. My name is Logan Staats. I'm Mohawk, Turtle Clan from Six Nations. I'm a singer-songwriter. I'm a dad. I'm an activist. I'm a warrior. I'm a Mohawk man. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So you do a lot. I've noticed like with like you said, you're a warrior, right? Like the land back stuff. You've been doing a lot of that, like out west, right?
Yeah.
And like the missing and murdered Indigenous women.
Yeah.
That's some crazy stuff. Like that's, for someone that's like has a career in music to kind of take the initiative to kind of push and use their music towards that, or like, I think that's crazy and it's good. So my first question that leads up to my first question, what's the driving factor to kind of like keep you creating music in that sense?
Well, I think the driving factor for me to keep going, is as I keep, progressing in my music career, it takes me further and further away from home, to communities like this, so I've been able to go across the back of the turtle and see the conditions of our First Nations communities, and it's been troubling for me, and I feel like it's my obligation as an artist and as a musician, as someone who is the voice of the people, to amplify these situations and help the public become aware of what's happening, because a lot of people just don't even know, a lot of people don't even know that there's murdered and missing Indigenous women, laying in the landfills in Winnipeg. A lot of people have no idea about that. A lot of people don't even know that they're putting pipelines in the ground and then digging up our bones on the West Coast. A lot of people don't know that we are, facing genocide as we speak and as we do this interview, and so for me as an artist and as a musician, as an activist, I'm just like, man, how can I use my platform to make sure that there's an awareness, about these issues, and hopefully, that can spark conversation and dialogue, and we can figure out how to move forward and heal, together as First Nations people and settlers.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's good stuff. So now, like, when I know this is kind of like off topic, but a few years ago, we've had recently like a case of missing and murdered here, and it's not something we see a lot of like in our territory. So when that happened, where I'm a photographer, I kind of went out and I did a series of photos that kind of represented like, I used my art, I guess, to kind of bring awareness to that, and I had an exhibit for it, and when my grandfather came in and he said, "Are you happy with how it turned out?" Because there wasn't like a crazy amount of people that showed up. And I said to him, I was like, "No, I don't really care about the people that showed up. It's the fact that it grabbed traction from the news, and like the news came in and talked about it, and really it's like the biggest thing is stirring the pot, right? Bring that stuff up to the top so people can see it, right? So I think it's awesome that you're using your platform
Yeah, man. I always say, man, we all have our gift from Creator. You know, like I'm a singer songwriter. I write sad songs for a living. You are a photographer. You know, some of us are athletes. You know, some of us are TikTok stars. You know, we all have this special, unique kind of diamond in the rough mentality and gift from Creator. And now it's time that we take those gifts and we direct that energy towards, you know, fighting for our lands, fighting for our people, for our language, for our waters, you know, for our resources. And the best way we can do that is to use the gifts that we were given from Creator.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. So, like the missing and murdered Indigenous women, like whole thing, like has that affected you in like the sense of like not, I mean, it affects everybody, right? But in the sense of like personally, like has that ever like...
It hasn't personally affected me. Like none of my actual sisters or anyone like that have been gone missing, you know, but it's a weird thing because every single one of these First Nations people here, we're all connected, you know, and we are all hongwe, and we are all relatives, you know, so it's hard to kind of say that, it's hard to answer that question, you know, because of course I've been directly affected by this thing because, you know, whether or not I met, you know, these missing sisters, these missing daughters, you know, they're still a part of me and they're still a part of that connection to the land, you know, and I have my boots on the ground in Winnipeg, you know, I spent a lot of time on the front line at Camp Morgan up there, you know, and it's a different kind of land back scenario, you know, you're not going toe to toe with resource extraction, you know, you're spending time on these spaces and you're working directly with the families, you know, of these missing daughters and these missing, like, you know, with their relatives directly. So it's really, really emotional. You know, it's really, really, it's hard, you know, it's hard to do, but it's also like, you know, it's such a big part of land back as a whole, you know, like making sure that our sisters, our brothers are brought home, making sure that they have a place to call home. You know, that's such a big part of land back as a movement.
So now, like, you said you were out west with the whole, like, you were in the active areas type thing. See, we've had like the issue in Mi'kmaq territory. That was like the closest thing to home for me. And I know when that happened, that was like, it's very, very like, it's intense. Like you really need to come together when you do that stuff, right? I don't know where I was going with that question. I had a question out of it. It'll come back to me.
Yeah, man, it's all right. It's all right. It's how these things go.
But yeah, no, like this podcast, like I said, is super, super.
No, I
raw.
like that.
Like
man.
I like the actual conversation, you know, rather than like, oh, it's like we're gonna take this piece and put it here. You know? I don't believe in that, right? So let's talk about your music a little more.
Okay.
Back in 2000, what was it? 2016, 17, right?
Yeah.
That wasn't your first time in the spotlight, though, was it? Like,
it was like my first time as far as like, you know, like mainstream media exposure, you know, but I had done a lot in my career to get me there. You know, I'd already been touring with Buffy Sainte-Marie. I had already won the Native American Music Award and 2 Indigenous Music Awards. You know, like I was starting to kind of make a name for myself before I did the whole launch thing, you know, and that whole experience, you know, like I learned so much from it. It was one of the most challenging things I've ever faced as a human, you know, to go through that kind of, to be a First Nations person and be put through that, you know, that mainstream media kind of car wash.
yeah.
You know, it was really difficult for me, you know, and it separated me from music and why I like to play music. And, you know, it really, really, it sent me down a really, really kind of hard and difficult path, you know? So I had to take, you know, my own time to kind of heal and find medicine and find my way back to music, you know? So Light in the Attic is kind of me reclaiming music, you know, and playing music for me again, you know, and playing music that just falls out of me emotionally, you know, because for a long time after doing the launch, you know, I was like in hit song mode. I wanted to make radio hits, and there was a certain formula to that, you know, and it really took a little bit of the medicine and the creativity out of music, you know. So Light in the Attic was just me like taking that back. You know,
yeah.
I'm gonna write the songs I want to write. I don't care if they're too sad or
Yeah.
5 minutes long, or you know, like this is me and my music and my art, unfiltered, raw, and that's how I want it.
Okay, yeah. So you found that like the mainstream media, they really like they ring you out, like in the sense of like you need to write this and it needs to be this good and it needs to be, you know, like there's a certain level it needs to be before it's put out.
Yeah. It's the mainstream media is a difficult thing to just to find your place in, especially when you're a First Nations person. And you got to remember, this was 2017. A lot has changed from then until now, you know, as far as just socially and the, you know, Indigenous people being accepted in the media. Like a lot has changed, you know, like back then it wasn't, you know, it was before all the media attention from Kamloops or before, you know, so it was like the public wasn't where they are now, you know? So it was different and more difficult for me back then.
Yeah.
You know, whereas if I feel like if opportunity was in front of me now, the world is a little different. You know, like people are treating Indigenous people a little bit differently, you know, and maybe it would have been a little different.
So do you think that like the whole transition to like Aboriginal people being like more accepted in that whole like kind of the sphere of stuff, do you find that you were kind of like at the foot of that, like when it started? Like you were kind of, I don't want to say like one of the, I don't know what the right term would be to use, like the ones that kind of started the movement, you know? I mean, I know like obviously like the Kamloops stuff was like a huge push to that, you know, people realizing, oh man, like this is a big deal.
Yeah, like I don't know, if you go back to my interviews from me doing the launch, man, like I did all the big time interviews at E-Talk and CTV, and like I did all those interviews, and every single one of my interviews I was urging the public, you know, like trying to educate people about residential schools, you know, because that's directly affected me, you know, and there's I didn't want to go in there and talk about something that I didn't know anything about, you know, so that was kind of like, this is me speaking from my heart, you know, and that was way before any of this, any of the Kamloops stuff happened, you know, so I think a lot of us as Indigenous artists have been kind of banging our heads against the wall, you know, trying to tell the public and inform the public, you know, but sometimes it takes things like Kamloops to get everyone to wake up, you know? Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Kind of going back, like you were talking about, you know, like how you wrote this whole album, like for yourself, right?
Yeah.
I was recently watching something, and another photographer that's out of Toronto, he was talking about how society and like mainstream media has made us think, oh, like for photography, we call them bangers, right?
Yeah.
So it's like every photo needs to be a banger. Like if it's not, we're not posting it.
Yeah.
But then I find like same thing with music. If you post only your best, then that becomes your norm.
Yeah.
So then when you want something that's like above everything, there's where you're going to go.
Yeah.
If you just made like the best you can make, I mean, there's never an end to what you can make, but in the sense of mainstream media, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's cool that you know decided to write an album just for you.
Yeah.
And I think it's super important, right? And actually, I just listened to a few songs today because I don't know, I've been stuck on your older stuff.
Yeah.
That stuff is like crazy, but I just listened to a few songs on your new album, and I was like, this is. You can tell the difference. You can tell that it's more meaningful, more like you're putting more into it.
Yeah.
And I like that. I think that's a good thing, right?
Well, thank you so much, man. Like music to me is medicine. You know, like there's no way around that, you know, and I was at a time in my life coming off that TV show where I needed some medicine, you know. And this album, writing it, going through that process, front to back, was that medicine. You know, it was that life-changing, life-saving experience for me. You know, I call it a light in the attic. It's a play on words, and it means a light in the addict. Because I struggled with addiction, and I struggled with social anxiety and all facets of mental health, and I still do today, you know. But this album was my medicine for that, you know, and it was that, like, no matter how shitty things can get, you know, there's always that light. You know, there's always that light.
So actually, kind of like, you know, you just opened up to a question that's farther down, but I'm going to ask this one now. So I gotta find it, man. Where is it? I only have like 4 questions here. I should be able to find it. Like dealing with mental health in the industry, right? Because I know, like, as a photographer, like there's times where it's like just everything that's going on as a photographer, just kind of like it just throws right at you, right? So in the music industry, do you find it's harder to deal with it as an like an indigenous person than it would be like non-indigenous in the industry?
I find that it evolves, you know, like at first when I was getting into the industry, I had no idea of any of my teachings, you know, I had no idea of my identity as a Mohawk man. I didn't know a word of the language, you know, so I was separated from my culture. And now as I go through this process of slowly reclaiming that, you know, I'm finding that there's a lot of things about being indigenous that really help for my mental health, you know, like going to sweats, connecting with the land, you know, something as simple as sitting by the water and really just like becoming one with nature, you know, and as I slowly just learn these fundamental teachings, it makes the journey throughout the music industry a lot easier, you know, because I have my medicines, I have my ceremonies, you know, and as indigenous people, we will always have that to fall back on, you know?
That's cool. So when you first started into music, like, you said you didn't have your teachings, you didn't know them. So growing up, like, you weren't immersed in your culture as much?
No, I'm a generational survivor of the Mush Hole on Six Nations, the residential school there. You know, so my parents still to this day are apprehensive about First Nations culture, you know, and we're finally at the place in our family and in our generational, you know, pool of now we're starting to reclaim that and be proud of it, you know, and it's a beautiful thing, you know. But yeah, there was that separation all my life, you know, and that separation that my grandfather had and my grandmother had and my mom has, you know, but at the same time, you know, that's made me who I am, you know, and it's given me the skin that I'm in, you know. So even though my family went through that and you know, and it's affected them in certain ways, I'm so proud of my family and who they are, you know, because we're still here and we're strong people, you know, and strong members of the Mohawk community.
So when you were like getting immersed into your culture and stuff, right, like your teachings, did you find it was harder coming in at that point than it would have been like, obviously, like I grew up on the reservation, and like I didn't really, because we're city, right? So a lot of our language is kind of like, we're getting it back now, but as a rule, growing up, language wasn't really a priority up here, because we're in the city. It's like, oh, we got to blend in with everybody, you know, like,
Of course.
and it kind of sucked, you know. Now that I'm 30 and I'm trying to get my, you know, my culture back. Did you find at a certain age it became harder to learn, like language, for instance, right? Learning a new language at like X amount of age is
so hard,
right?
So hard, man. Sorry.
It's all good. It just adds to it. It's the best. It's the best. It just shows like how much how big of a family man you are, right? Like,
yeah, man. I
like
bring my
that.
family everywhere, man. I think it's such a native thing. You know?
No, it is. It actually is. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think it presents its challenges, you know, like having that separation from your community early off. I was playing hockey against the native kids, you know, like I was living in an urban setting and then living on the edge of the reserve, you know, so I didn't really fit in on res, you know. I was like kind of like this white kid. People called me an apple, you know, red on the outside, white on the inside.
Yeah.
You know, and then in town, I was this full-blown native guy, right? And so it was like two different perspectives from two different communities, which made it difficult, you know. But I don't know, I found my way back to Six Nations, you know, and music was my vessel for that. You know, I have this inherent ability to tell stories and to speak to people through music, you know, and I know that comes from my Mohawk roots, you know, so that really opened a lot of doors for me in the community. And not only that, just like, you know, also doing the land back stuff, you know, getting out there and standing up for the land. It connects you to your community. It connects you to your people as a whole, you know, and it shows people that you care about the community, and it helps you kind of earn that respect and earn that trust within the community.
No, for sure. So your earlier music, right? None of that was it inspired by your culture, or like did you have like was that later on that you started to write more?
Yeah, I would say that, you know, that process of reclamation and that sense of wanting somewhere, longing to belong, you know, whether or not I knew it was, you know, directly, whether or not there's hey ya, way ya's in my music, you know, the culture and that story is embodied in every note that I play and chord that I, you know, it's just embodied in it, whether or not I wanted it to be or not, because that's the truth.
Yeah.
You know, that's the truth. And sometimes as a singer-songwriter, you write songs and you have no idea what they mean. And then 4 years later, you're like, what the hell? That song makes sense now,
Yeah.
you know? And as a songwriter, just the way that I operate, you know, I just try to tap into that spirit of it, you know, of music, and just let things organically happen the way that creator would want them to, you know?
So while you were out like in the field and stuff, right? Like with the laying back stuff, were you writing music out like then too, or were you just like were you focusing 100% on?
Yeah, when I was out there, I wasn't writing. When I was out there, I was busy. I had my hands full. We were building, we were prepping, we were, you know, collecting water. We were working our asses off, you know, and I didn't even think about music. And then I got home after being arrested, you know, and I got home, and finally after all of the storm had kind of quieted, and I got home and I was like, man, like now I want to write. You know, now that everything's kind of settled and the dust has settled, now I want to write. And I didn't have my guitar at the time because the police had taken my guitar and smashed my guitar.
Wow.
So I was sitting at home and I'm like, well, I need to create. I need to let this fall out of me somehow. So I grabbed a hand drum and I just started writing, you know, and I spent all night just writing different verses and different hooks, and all about what had happened to me, and all about like that experience and what that had made me feel like, and how it just made the power in my blood boil, you know? And yeah, it was like, while you're down there, you're too busy to really do that. But once you kind of just like settle, it's like it all hits you, at least for me, you know?
So like, excuse me. No, I can see how like I don't want to say coming off the high, because it's not like something you would be whatever about, you know, when you're there. But when you settle, like you said, I guess that's the proper term. So after you come back and you're like, okay, wow, like this was actually, you know, this is what happened. Because when you're there, you don't have time to think. Like, you know, it's constant go, right? Yeah. So coming back and like just being able to be like, you know, reflect on all the stuff that happened, right? That's crazy. I like this question. I asked this question in my podcast quite a bit. So like, if you could tell your younger self something, right? Like, it could be your 7-year-old self, your 10-year-old self. But if you could tell yourself 3 words, right? Like, what would them 3 words be as a young person?
Don't do drugs. You know?
Yeah.
That would be that if I could go back in time and tell my younger self, you know, it would be, don't waste my time with that, you know, because it's so easy to fall into, but it takes so long to crawl out of. It's a lifelong thing, you know, and all that stuff does is just hinder your creativity, you know, and the power that you have inside of you, you know? So that's my advice, you know, for again, I know it's like, it's a big thing, you know, a lot of our youth are struggling with this stuff, you know, and I know how it feels firsthand. I've been there right beside them, you know, like I know how that feels. And I wish I had more people, you know, in my early days, just explaining the dangers inside the music industry, you know, and preparing me for that, you know, so, yeah.
So another question I want to ask you, because you were talking about youth earlier, for not necessarily just young people, but people in general, like First Nations, what's something you would, you know, tell them that if they wanted to get into the industry, right, like the music industry, like things they should watch for, things like, you know, like what they should do or how they should go about it?
Well, you know, every day's a learning experience, you know, and one thing that I've really learned is the only thing that you can really control in the music industry is your own work ethic, you know, and that's you can build these great teams of managers and agents and record labels, but it's at the end of the day, it's your responsibility to set that bar, you know, and really push everybody on your team, you know. It's one of the most beautiful things I've ever got to be a part of is music and sharing my gift, you know. But it's extremely hard work. It's extremely hard work, and but that's the thing, you know. We come from First Nations communities that produce diamonds in the rough that are built for this. You know, our people are built for this, and yeah.
No, I could only imagine. Like the music industry seems pretty intense. You know,
Yeah.
I have a few friends that are in the music industry, and they like the amount of stress that gets put on them is crazy.
Yeah,
you know,
it can be difficult.
And I don't know. I feel like a lot of the ones that I know are smaller, right? And I'm seeing that, and it's like, okay, I only can imagine if you were like playing different shows or playing like, you know, like if you had.
The one thing that's really cool about the Indigenous music industry, though, is it's not as cutthroat. Like everyone is out here trying to help one another succeed. You know, like, and that's one of the things that I really push as an Indigenous artist. You know, like who could, like Buffy St. Marie picked me as a young artist to open up for her, and it changed my life. You know, like, so how can I in some way try to do that for, you know, an up and coming artist, you know, and how can, and that's the one thing is about the Indigenous art scene, you know, is we have each other's back. We don't have that colonial way of thinking, and we're here to build each other up. So it's a little bit of a safety net because you have brothers and sisters that you can just simply ask, you know, like, how do I do this? What are my next steps? How do I move forward and do better?
Yeah.
You know? And that's the one thing that's really, really amazing about Indigenous media, you know, is that it's all your relatives out here.
That's true, yeah. That's a good way to look at it. I've never looked at it that way. Maybe it's because the industry here, like I said earlier, we're so like in the city, right? So a lot of the stuff that goes on here isn't really. I mean, recently we're getting more like culture-based stuff, but a lot of our musicians will play over town, where you're going to play tonight, right? Cool. And they don't usually play with like a whole group of First Nations, right? Usually like non-native and then like a couple natives, and like I find the industry here for the music, where maybe it's so small, right? Everybody's kind of out for themselves type thing. Yeah. And maybe that's just here. Yeah. But I can see what you're saying, you know, like as a photographer, I know a lot of First Nation photographers that like we're on this, you know, we're in it together, right? Like a lot of people will go in and be like, oh no, I ain't going to tell you where this spot is because you know, you're going to use it. But now it's like, no, I'm going to tell you where it is because it's an awesome spot. Yeah. Right. Like Nate Gaffney and Desmond Simon, two of the most amazing videographers I know. Like I talk to them on a daily, you know, like ask questions. They ask me questions, you know. Yeah. I think that's cool. What is it called? A communal pot of knowledge? They just kinda like, I think that's the term people use. Communal pot of knowledge. Yeah. I liked it. Yeah. I think that I learned that when I went to the craft college. I went over on the south side to take Aboriginal art. Cool. So they had Aboriginal teachers teach like Aboriginal art. So it'd be like quilt, like basket making, quill work, beating, drums, you know, like drums was my medium. Like that's what I'm good at, and that's what I've always been good at. Cool. But no, it's a super cool, like there's a lot of teachings that were taught as kids that aren't really our teachings. Yeah. Like here in our territory, like our colors, you know, when we were growing up, like, oh, these are the native colors. Yeah. Like the red, white, and black and yellow. Yeah. And it's like here in Mollistigoy territory, our colors are very, I don't know if you can see them two paintings. They're done by a Percy Sakobi, which is a crazy artist here in our territory. And that's our colors. Like we're very floral people. Cool. You know, so I don't know, going to the craft college kind of opened my eyes up in the sense of like a lot of things, right? But yeah, no, communal pot of knowledge. It's a good term to use. I use it whenever I can. Yeah, man. So you have any future projects coming up that you can talk about? Because I know like sometimes there's projects you can't talk about, you know. Well, I got a new project that I'm so excited about. You know, I got a new album and some new songs that I've been writing, like all these land back songs. You know, I've been collecting all of this content just like mentally in my brain.
I've really, really been able to refine it into some really, really amazing new material, you know, and I'm going for like a kind of new sound with my next record. It's going to be like very soul oriented, like almost like Etta James meets Chris Stapleton kind of, you know, and some new instrumentation and some new instruments. And I'm just like so pumped on how it's sounding. You know, it's got me excited about music again, you know. So that's in the works right now. That's in the works, man. New record, new band, you know, and just like a whole new kind of Logan Staats and tenacity.
All right, cool. Now, musicians that you would like to work with, right? This kind of, I think about, because we have a group here, I can't think of their name, something Crows, but Maddie Como, Judy Aquin, and like they're really good musicians. And I feel like you were talking about, you know, like new instruments coming in, and I feel like that would be a cool thing to see, is like another indigenous-based like musician or like group, right? Like, do you have any collaborations coming up that, you know, are similar to that, or?
You know, like, I guess like the last collaboration that I did was with Buffy, you know, and I got to do Codine, which is on my new record, and I was able to cover that and get her voice on the track, you know. But as far as just like collaborations coming down the road, like, who knows what'll happen, man? You know, because I'm not just writing songs for myself anymore. You know, I'm writing songs for other indigenous artists, you know, and so I have some really, really amazing collaborations coming up with just like different artists. As far as, I don't know if you've ever heard of Quanta Style.
I haven't, no.
She's from Vancouver, really amazing artist. I'm doing some writing for her. I just, Tom Wilson just released one of my songs, you know, so I'm doing a lot of writing for others, you know. But as far as collaborations, man, who knows what will happen? I hope so. I hope so, man. If I could have a dream artist to work with right now, I would probably say it's Neil Young.
Wow.
I think that would be really cool.
That would be interesting.
Neil Young.
I can kind of hear that. That'd be pretty crazy.
Yeah, you know, he does so much great work, and you know, and stands up for the land himself, you know, and is honoring the treaties is a big part of his music, you know. So it'd be cool to connect with him on that level, you know.
Well, the sky's the limit, right? It could happen.
Neil, call me, man. Get your people to call my people, Neil.
You'll get a call later. When this is released, you'll get that call. I love that. You already answered like where the inspiration came from, you know, for A Light in the Attic, and that makes, you know, so much sense. Like after you described or explained, you know, the name Light in an Attic, right?
Yeah.
That's deep. Dealing with you already asked that. Futures, and you're rolling them right out. You're good. it's like you've done this before or something.
A couple times, you know, but actually normally it doesn't go this well. You know, it's been a really, really great interview, man, and I really, really appreciate you, you know, checking me out, checking out my music, and inviting me here, you know, and I look forward to just like what else can we do together, man?
Yeah,
it's just beginning.
One of the biggest things that, like, when I first started this podcast, I started as a creators and entertainers podcast. So where I'm a photographer, I did a lot of like creators on here, and then recently I wanted to change it a little bit and kind of involve more indigenous stuff, where I'm First Nations, and I wanted a lot more, you know, like educate people, right? And the ones that I've had lined up, where our schedules never meet, right? So it's always hard to make it work. But then I saw that you were coming to Fredericton, and I was like, this is a good way to start this whole like push of indigenous artists, right? I know, like, I have, like I said, like Desmond and Nate, like they're two wicked photographers. I have them coming on, but like, no, to have you on as like the start of it is a big thing, right? And when I messaged you, I was like, I realized I messaged you on my spot on my podcast page, and I was like, oh, I don't have that many followers on this. Like, this ain't gonna pop up for anybody. Is the store good? What? Oh, in the camera? Okay, well, we got the little one recording, so we're good. This is the things we run into with this stuff, right? But it's all good. We got that little guy recording. I still see the light flashing.
Cool.
But yeah, no, I usually, like, I'm verified on my personal account, right? After like a year of waiting.
Yeah.
But I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna this way I'll be bumped up to the top. But And then you responded with like just like a quick Skoden, you know, like oh, like this is real. I was like, this is cool. Just the fact that you did that, I knew that you were the right guy to have on for the first one.
Awesome.
I do have a couple more questions.
Yeah.
Actually, you answered that. So I'm going to ask you a question that's not on the list, but what's a question that you wish I would have asked? You know, like I always find this is interesting. Like people, like sometimes they come into a podcast and they're like, oh, I hope they ask this. I hope they ask this, right? So like, is there a question that you would have asked or would have hoped I've asked?
Yeah, I guess one of my like I just have this vibe about me where I'm just trying to radicalize everybody at all times, you know, and get everyone to just stand up and fight for the land, you know. So like my question that I would have liked to is like, you know, what can I do as a videographer to contribute to Wet'suwet'en or contribute to, you know, like how can I use my gift, you know, because it's so important right now. You know, like we are at a last stand in some of our reservations right now, you know? So everyone just needs to just warrior up, you know, and that's where I'm at. And so, yeah.
So now like that could come across two different ways, right? Like warrior up meaning like front line, right?
Yeah.
Like going right in. Or it could mean like educating people, I guess, right?
Yeah.
It was a big way to do it. Because like I know like with here, like I said, we don't really experience a lot of it, but we're like Indigenous people is one. You know what I mean? Like if the reservations out west are getting attacked, like we feel like we're getting attacked. You know, that's how it is. So yeah, no, I like that. You know, like just kind of just warrior up. I like that. That's good. But anything you want to add, and any like, you know, shout outs to anybody and, you know, people you want to thank or anything like that?
Man, I just like to thank you, you know, and you know, if you, I don't know when this will be coming out. If you have a chance to get down to the show, you know, or see me in the future in Fredericton, you know, just shoot me a message. You know, I'm not some crazy person that's hard to get a hold of or hard to get a response from. You know, I try to interact with every one of my relatives, you know, so hit me up, you know, in person or online. You know, I'm out here.
Awesome. Well, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it. Since that card's full, I don't really want to run this. That was pretty good. It's
Cool.
40 minutes. So
Cool.
Usually that's roughly what they've been going lately.
Cool.
But thank you again for coming on. I appreciate it. Have an awesome show.
Yeah,
you know,
man.
safe travels for your rest of your tour. And you got 3 here in Atlantic Canada.
Yeah. 3 on the East Coast.
Yeah,
so.
that's crazy.
Yeah, man.
It's good stuff. Well, thank you again.
Thank you.
All
Yeah,
right.
we'll go and Onagwai.